Hi everyone, my name's Sheehan. This is a quick video on perfectionism and the impact perfectionism has on our lives. The other day I was making a video and I had a deadline. I wanted to get this video off to someone and I had a couple of days to put it together. And I thought, all right, well, it should be pretty easy. I'll sit down and I'll talk at my phone, how hard could it be? But every time I did, I tried to make it perfect. And of course, when I sat down to speak, it's like I'd open my mouth and nothing would come out. And so I started putting all this pressure on myself, and this pressure built and built, and the stress grew, and the deadline was approaching. And I must have had about 30 or 40 goes at it, just trying to get the words right, trying to perfect it, trying to remember exactly what I was supposed to. And wrote some stuff down and ended up reading it, and everything just didn't work. Or should I say, nothing worked. And eventually I found myself in this space where I was so stressed. It was like, riding a wave. The wave's coming and I'm sitting on top of the crest of this wave and I've got two decisions. One of those decisions is to give up and the other one is to just ride it out. Unfortunately, I chose to ride it out. And it was a fairly amazing experience because, at that point, it's like I didn't want to fail. I didn't want it to go badly. But I was trying to perfect it. And these two things sort of run in opposition to each other. And the thing that got me through was resilience. I knew that I had to get it done. I wanted to get it done. And because I'd spent so long going over the words, time and time again and getting them wrong and not being able to put a coherent thought together, a bunch of coherent sentences to turn it into anything, eventually, once I'd hit peak stress, and I decided that I wasn't going to fail at it, that I was actually going to do this. Finally, the words came out of my mouth. And that was a great lesson for me because, in life, how often do we do this? How often do we try and perfect something and it doesn't work? How often do we build a mountain out of a molehill? How often do we set something up on a pedestal and, try and achieve it and we can never ever get there? And that's something that we all do, but it's something that's inside of us, something that we can actually make choices around. So the choice that I made while I was sitting on the top of that metaphorical wave, I'm not going to fail this. I've got to ride this one out. I've got to get this done. And part of that is this internal driver that says, well, I've promised something to somebody. I'm going to deliver on that promise. Part of it is to say, well, I'm not going to give up. I have to keep going. I have to persist with this thing. And, part of it, obviously, in the negative direction is perfection. This thing that says it has to be right. And the question is, well, what does that mean? What does right mean? And I never had a clear picture of what right meant. Right is, something that's not just sitting here talking into my phone. Right is, something that would be a production quality outcome, something you'd expect from, a team of 20 people. That was what I realised I was doing. It had to be right, but right runs contrary to everything else. Right means that you're not getting an honest, raw image of me. You're getting something else. Right means you're getting something that's been polished and twisted and manipulated. And it might not be a bad thing to polish something up, but it had crossed that line into perfectionism. I'm trying to get something right. I want to get it right. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it crossed that line, that's when things started to go badly for me. And that's when I started to get, overtaken by stress. And that's when I found myself having to go and go and go and nothing was coming to mind. And there I was sitting on top of that wave and I knew I had to make a decision. That decision was, do I fail at this or do I ride it out? And unfortunately, that decision's led me to this point where I've had that experience. And that's a good experience because now when I sit here and I think, well, I know what to do. All I've got to do is focus on the right things. The right things are just turn up, talk, open my mouth, let the words come out. Don't try and control it and just see where it goes and see what happens. And it sounds really cliche and easy to do, but I'd gotten to that point where my head was just so full. I was so stressed. It's almost like everything else went away and all I could do was open my mouth and speak. And sometimes that's what we need. We need to get to that point I need to get to that point where everything else just falls away, and the only thing that's left is what comes naturally. And so it wasn't a great experience to have going through it, getting to that point. But afterwards, it felt good. Afterwards, I'd come down off the wave, felt a bit washed out. But then I realized I've got to do it again. It's making videos is part of my life, and I have to step up and I have to do it. So perfectionism, the adverse qualities of perfectionism is that it caused me all of this stress, and I didn't actually clearly define what I meant by the right outcome. I want to get it right. I didn't have a clear image of what that meant, and I just didn't accept anything that had come up prior to that. So it was a great learning experience, in that I was able to look at perfectionism, the adverse effects that it had, and look at resilience and how that got me through. And so that's a little quick anecdote on perfectionism.